السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Thank you, Dr. Ahmed, and your wonderful team, and thank you, Brother Faiz, also, and your wonderful team. I serve on both teams. That's the education team and the mental health team. MashaAllah, mental health support team. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless both and all the teams that work tirelessly to serve our community. That being said, I'd like to extend my most sincere condolences again to Sister Isra Zubaidi and Brother Haki Zubaidi, our beloved community members and amazing human beings, for the passing away of their son Imran. May Allah give him Jannah and give them patience and make this very difficult experience an inspiration for all of us to do better in many different ways. Ameen, Allahumma ameen. That being said, Sister Isra and Brother Haki wanted to share a few words with our community at this very difficult time. I commend your courage to do so, and we really admire that. We appreciate everything that you will say to us and share with us. So now, without any further ado, Sister Isra, Brother Haki, if you can come forward, Jazakumullah khairan.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm going to say a couple of words and let my wife share with her from her family history. But I don't know if you all know, about a week ago today, our son went missing, and they found him later on in the evening before Maghrib time. He died. He suffered from depression, and no matter, because of my wife's family history, we got all of our children tested. We had all of them going to therapy. And as a result, he had a working relationship with a therapist. Okay, I'm sorry. He had a working relationship with a therapist until he was 18. And this is the troubling part. Once he became 18, he was considered an adult. And any intervention from our point of view, he had to follow up with it, which he didn't. And you know, one thing about the depression is that it's hidden. It doesn't really manifest itself until you start seeing some outward signs. And one of the things we noticed, he withdrew from people he went to high school with, the close friends. He withdrew from us. The light and the brightness that was in his eyes went away. He never smiled anymore. He separated himself from us at home. He wouldn't eat dinner with us. He totally closed himself off from the family. He stayed in his room. And it's difficult. I have to stop blaming myself, because anybody who knows me, I fix stuff. I help people on emergency medical runs, and I couldn't save our son. I couldn't help him. And the more I talked to my younger daughter and I talked to my wife, he got to the point where the darkness that he was in with the depression had such a grip on him. He was just tired of dealing with what he was dealing with, and he took steps. If anyone saw my wife's post, she explained it in the post. If she wants to go into it tonight, she can. But we as parents, we as a community, we have to stop stigmatizing people with mental health. It is an illness, it is a disease. We ought to attack it like we would cancer. If we saw someone with a broken leg, we'd be hurrying up trying to fix it so they can get back well. Well, once the mind is broken, we have professionals who can come in and inshallah try to get them on a road of recovery. I just want us to stop stigmatizing mental health so people don't have to suffer in silence, so they can come forward and get the help they need. I had 2 individuals at the gravesite pulled me up to the side. One of them told me, a young man told me, he was having the same thoughts Munir was having. He just didn't take it the step further to end his life. And I said, give me your phone right now. Give me your phone. and I put him in contact with Munir's therapist. So we all have somebody in our family we know that could use the help. And what I want us to do is take the shame off of mental illness. We have to take the shame off of it because we go through it, and we need to help one another. So what we're hoping and praying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through his wisdom, will use our loss to help those who may be going through the same thing, so that we can benefit the community, even though we're hurting. It was just a week ago today. We're hurting right now, but inshallah we're maintaining patience, because Allah loves those who are patient, and we want Allah to love us. So I appreciate your time. Assalamu alaikum.
So Haki touched on some of the points that I went over in the masjid on Wednesday. I think what I want to explain to everyone is that for a long time, I would say from the time that Munir was 3 or 4 years old, he was just like any other child. He had friends. He was happy. He was quote unquote normal. The first time that I had any indication that there was an issue was when I sent him and his older sister to MENA camp. And he had never been away from home, and I tried to explain to him that I needed him to experience this. I needed him to be around his Muslim brothers and sisters and be away from home. And he had an outstanding counselor named Omar Brajawi, who kind of took him under his wing and reassured me that, you know, this is normal and it's okay and that he should stay, and he did. And he actually turned the whole thing around and ended up winning some sort of debate. But I remember him saying to me that if I didn't let him come home, that he might harm himself. He was in therapy at that time, so I alerted his therapist, and his therapist actually called him and reassured me that Munir was okay. Munir made it through MENA camp fine, and I think he was a better person as a result of it. So from 14 to 18, he was in therapy, and he shined. I mean, he was on different in different activities at school. He had friends. He worked. Everything seemed to be normal until it wasn't. So Munir once he graduated, he went to UC. He was on campus for the second semester, and toward the end of that semester, he told me, "Mom, you're going to get a bill from UC." And I said, "Well, of course I am. It's not free. Of course I'm going to get a bill." He said, "No, you're going to get a medical bill." I said, "What's going on?" He said, "Well, they came and got me, and I went to the hospital for a while." So around the same time that he told me, his therapist called my husband and told him, and the school counselor called me. His high school counselor called me and told me what had happened. A teacher that Munir did not have a class with, that he had a really good relationship with, said that Munir had a preoccupation with a funeral march. Munir taught himself how to play piano. So from that point on, I would talk to him. I would stress to him that he needed to see his therapist, that those thoughts were not normal thoughts, and that he should get it addressed. He said he would, and I believed him, but he didn't. And so this past, somewhere between April and July, I just can't remember the exact date, Munir went to the doctor. The doctor called me and said, "Is this for Zubairi?" I said, "Yes." I said, "What's going on?" I can see it was TriHealth. she said, your son is here and he needs to be admitted to UC. Do you want him to go by squad or do you want to take him? I said, well, he just went in for a headache. What's going on? She said, well, Munir just explained to me that he tried to harm himself and that's why he has a headache. So needless to say, I rushed him to UC and we went through the ER. He was transferred over to the ER for the psychiatric part of UC. And I begged the doctor to keep him. I said, he is not going to do the therapy, the outpatient. Please keep him, please. They said, no, he doesn't meet the criteria. He said, he can do outpatient and he'll be fine. I said, I don't think that's going to happen, but okay. I can't, once he's 18, it's up to him. So I could do nothing. I could do nothing except take him home and pray and make dua, which is what I did. And I asked him, I said, Munir, I said, are you gonna try this again? And he looked at me and he said, I don't know. I said, okay. I said, okay. I said, well, we need to get you some help, so let's work on that. And that's what we were doing. I was working on him, trying to get him to go, and he was working on another plan. So that's kind of the story of how we ended up here. And we are here because we don't want to see this happen to anyone. No one should have to go through what we're going through right now. And it just starts with a conversation. It starts with, how are you doing? It starts with talking to teachers. It starts with talking to other parents. It starts with noticing behavior that's not right, that's different. If your child is isolating themselves, if your child is giving away prized possessions, if your child is cutting off friends, he did all of these things systematically. I only became aware when one of his best friends reached out to my daughter and said, do you know what's wrong? And she said no. And he shut his sister down. He wouldn't talk to her. I don't want to take up too much time. I just wanted to give you an idea of why we're here and why it means so much to us to continue to speak and to continue to let people know that this happens to everyone. We are not isolated. One more thing about my post. So a friend of mine said to me, Isra, everyone's not receiving your post so well. I said, well, I really didn't do it. You know, I did it to let people know. I wasn't really concerned about reactions. And I said, well, what did this person say? This particular person I'm speaking about is non-Muslim. A Muslim sister said to her, Muslims don't get depressed. Muslims don't get depressed, as if to say that we are not human. Of course we do. Of course we do. But that just gives you an idea of how important this is to the community, because there are some members of the community who believe that this doesn't touch us. And it does. And we're a witness. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you.
she didn't give me that. You have slides or no slides? Should I wait for them?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I would also like to extend my condolences to Sister Isra and Brother Haki and to thank them and commend them for their incredible strength and resilience. Tonight, inshallah, we have an event that is hosted by the ICGC Education, Family Connections, and the Mental Health and Community Wellness Group. We are honored to have you all here with us tonight. And before we begin, I would like to take a moment to share a little bit about the mental health initiative that we have been working on within our community for a few months now. Our mission is simple yet profound. We would like to create and enable a structured and sustainable mental health program at ICGC that enhances the lives of the broader Cincinnati Muslim community. We are blessed to have Dr. Rana Al-Maghrabi, Sister Nada Shaheen, and Sister Sana Iftikhar as our mental health experts, with guidance and support from the backbones of our community, Sheikh Hussam, Brother Henry, Brother Faiz, Brother Nazim, and Brother Ahmed, just to name a few. We are excited to continue building a foundation that not only addresses the mental health needs of our community, but fosters a culture of understanding, compassion, and support. It is no secret that mental health is a topic that is clouded by stigma and severe misunderstanding, especially within our community. But tonight and in everything that we do, our goal is to hopefully chip away at that stigma and to break down barriers and to create safe spaces for these conversations to take place. This event, inshallah, is what I hope to be the beginning of an ongoing effort to facilitate open and honest dialogue about mental health. My hope is that we begin thinking about not just our mental health, but the mental health of our children, our family, our friends, our spouses, with the same intent and care that we devote to our everyday priorities. We hope that this is the beginning and the continuation of ongoing meaningful conversations that will ripple through our community, inshallah. Inshallah, tonight's format will be a talk delivered by the esteemed and renowned Dr. Suzy Ismail, and there will be a question and answer session. There should be a QR code on each of the seats where you can submit your question anonymously, inshallah. Without further ado, it is my absolute honor and pleasure to welcome Dr. Suzy Ismail back to our community. Dr. Ismail is a leading expert in communication and mental health, and she is the founding director of Cornerstone, a nonprofit organization focused on culturally and spiritually informed interventions. With over a decade of experience as a visiting professor at Rutgers University and DeVry University, she emphasizes the intersection of education, faith, and culture in her teaching and research. Dr. Ismail holds multiple degrees, including a PhD in human services with a focus on family studies and intervention strategies. She is the author of several influential books, including Modern Muslim Marriage and When Muslim Marriage Fails, and is a sought-after speaker at universities and conferences worldwide. Her humanitarian work has earned her the Ambassador for Peace Award, and she is a pioneer in promoting mental health and awareness and well-being across diverse communities. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Suzy Ismail and giving her your undivided attention as we take a deep dive into mental health and maintaining healthy relationships within our families.
جزاك الله خير. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونشكره ونستعين ونستغفره ونتوب إليه ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له أشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. السلام عليكم. Is there an echo or can you hear me okay? It's okay, there's a slight echo. Is that better? That's not good. Is this better? Okay, alhamdulillah, I'll try to hold it in this way. All right, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. What an incredible gift it is to have with us two unbelievably strong, unbelievably beautiful parents with us here in this gathering. May Allah Azza wa Jal grant you sabr. May Allah Azza wa Jal grant you ease. May Allah Azza wa Jal allow you to be reunited with your beloved Munir in the highest levels of Jannah, insha'Allah. May Allah Azza wa Jal allow every tear that drops, every pain that you feel to be a pathway, a means of getting closer and closer to Him. May Allah Azza wa Jal allow you to be a means of ease, a means of solace, and a means of bringing awareness to our communities. And may Allah Azza wa Jal grant you your heart's desires in Jannah bi'iznillah. SubhanAllah. On the drive over here, I was with Sister Fatima in the car, and right before Maghrib, I don't know if you looked into the sky, but there was an incredible rainbow. How many of you saw that rainbow? Subhanallah. And I kept thinking, it didn't even rain. And yet Allah Azza wa Jal in His infinite rahmah, Allah Azza wa Jal in granting us glimpses of beauty in this dunya, glimpses of hope, allows us to see in the midst of so much pain that our communities are struggling with, in the midst of so much difficulty that we have seen, these glimpses of His rahmah. And that rainbow is just one of so many of the signs that Allah Azza wa Jal grants for us to see, to connect with Him, to be reminded that despite what this community has gone through, what this family has experienced, despite the hearts that have been in so much pain for the past year and 1 month now, with what is happening in Gaza, despite what is happening in Sudan, despite what is happening in so many countries, despite what is happening right here in our home, post-election, the number of hearts that are heavy, the number of hearts that fear and worry, despite all of the pains and the difficulties of our dunya, we know that Allah Azza wa Jal is Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, that He is the most merciful, He is the most compassionate. And not one of us will experience a test in this dunya, even a test as small as the prick of a thorn. And in that test, when we answer and we repeat, Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un, when our response is a response of sabr, a response of recognition that this dunya is but a drop of water on our fingers compared to the ocean of akhirah, when we stand firm in our iman and our resilience, then insha'Allah we will be able to get through these tests that we see in this dunya. But these tests are hard. These tests are difficult. This past week, I know our community in New York, New Jersey, and across the US and the UK and in many locations, our communities were rocked with a sense of betrayal. Someone who had been revered as a scholar, a teacher of Quran, it came to light that this individual who many of us had spoken with, shared stages with, communicated with, who many of us had this individual as a teacher of Quran for our children, this person, unfortunately, it came to light, was someone who was deceptive and who harmed children rather than helping them. And this is not the first betrayal in our community. It is another test in which Allah Azza wa Jal puts us through difficulty in this dunya, allows us as human beings to experience that pain, those tears, that stress, those fears, because that is what is promised to us in the Quran. Allah Azza wa Jal in Surah Al-Baqarah reminds us, وَلَنَبْلَوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَمِنَ الْجُوعِ, that surely you will be tested, we will test you, surely we will test you with something of fear and of hunger and of a loss of wealth, a loss of fruits, a loss of life. وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ, and give glad tidings to those who are patient. And who are the patient? The ones who in the face of tragedy say, Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. And so we begin our talk this evening with the recognition that there is no might, there is no power, there is no will but by Allah. We remind ourselves that it is from Him that we come to this earth and it is to Him that we return. But in that process of our short time in this dunya, as we face these tests, we must stop and ask ourselves, what are we meant to do? What is it that we as communities, we as families, we as masajid, we as individuals need to do in order to face these tests with that sabr? And not sabr that is passive, where we go through tests and we sit back and we say, well, there's nothing I can do about it. This is bala from Allah, and so I will sit back and I will take it. This is not the sabr that Allah Azza wa Jal prescribes for us. The sabr that is prescribed for us is a sabr that is built upon striving. It is built upon making sure that we have that sense of tawakkul, that reliance upon Allah, but that we are actively seeking the rahmah of Allah. We are actively seeking the avenues that Allah Azza wa Jal places in our pathways to help us through these difficulties. And that's what I see in this masjid today. In this masjid today, I see a community. I see individuals who are putting themselves out there, who are putting the effort to try to build a safe space, to build a community, to tackle one of the most prevalent difficulties and tests that I see today, which is the test of our mental wellness, the test of how we respond to our tests, the test of our resilience. Throughout this past year, as we've watched the slaughter and the genocide in Gaza, so many of us have marveled as to how those who are going through so much difficulty can lose their children, bury their young, watch their old decimated in front of them, face uncertainty, and yet still stand and say, Alhamdulillah. Still stand and say, Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Because this is what sabrun jamilun is. This is what it means to have tawakkul, to find that strength, to be going through that test and to face it. But our test is, what do we do with our emotions? How do we respond to the stress, to the difficulty, to the pain that we may encounter? How do we respond to seeing the loss of life, the loss of loved ones, the loss of community members? How do we respond to uncertainty? How do we respond to questions about the future? And one of the best ways to respond is to do it together, to ensure that each and every single one of us, from the young to the old, knows that you are not alone. Because Allah Azza wa Jal reminds us, we are not alone. He is there. The ummah is there, the community is there. But what happens when we feel alone? Because so often when we are struggling with our mental health, we may be surrounded by people, we may be surrounded by loving families who keep throwing us lifelines, who urge us to get help, and yet we may feel so alone. And this type of loneliness can be one of the most difficult forms of loneliness to overcome, because you become isolated within yourself. You begin to push others away because you feel like no one can help you. And this is why in the Quran we are reminded, لا تقنطوا من رحمة الله. Do not despair of the mercy of Allah. Because it is only when we find ourselves in this place of utter despair, when we feel hopeless, when we feel that nothing will get better, when we lose sight of Allah's promise that good will come, that is when we feel utterly alone. And that is what we must avoid. This masjid, ICGC, has a very special place in my heart. And I was so honored to be invited to come again. Several years ago in 2017, I came to the first youth conference that was held here, and it was in the same room, in the mirror room. And there was an event, a program that, was jam-packed for the youth, 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, middle school, high school, college students. And one of the key strategies, and Sarah was sharing this with me before, that they did to bring the youth to the lectures, to the talks on mental health, on wellness, on families, on relationships, was to tell them that they wouldn't be allowed to stay for the Dean Squad program that was going to happen at the end of the evening if they didn't go to the lectures. Brilliant tactic. So alhamdulillah, the talk that I was giving, the talk on wellness, mental health, on families, on relationships, on youth challenges, was in this room and the seats were filled. And I remember when I started talking, I introduced the subject, and then I wanted to hear from the youth, and I asked them, I said, tell me your questions. Ask anything you have. We passed around little index cards. It was before we had the fancy Slido QR code that we currently have. And I waited, and nobody said anything. Nobody wrote anything down. And I realized that this was not the way that our youth communicate. So I decided to put my cell phone number up on the screen. And I told them, you guys like to text. How about you text me your questions? A minute passed, 2 minutes passed, and then suddenly my phone was buzzing, and it was lighting up with text after text after text. And the questions that came from this community, from our youth, were heartbreaking questions. Questions such as, I don't think my parents love me, what should I do? Questions such as, I was sexually abused when I was a child, and this is the first time I'm telling anyone about it, what should I do? And these children knew that I wasn't from the community, that I had no way of tracing their phone numbers, that I didn't know who they were, and so in that anonymity, they began to ask. And what was truly memorable about this conference was that I went back to my hotel room, and the texts kept coming. And I remember this day so clearly, despite the conferences and youth programs that I attend, because that night I didn't sleep. Because the questions kept coming and coming and coming, and I found other children messaging me saying, I wasn't at the program at the mosque today, but my friend gave me your number and he said I could ask you anything. Can I? And what broke my heart was that after I stayed up and I answered these questions, so many of these youth answered back and said, I can't believe you answered me. I didn't think I would get a response. Wait. You're answering my question? And to this day, this was 2017, we're in 2024. To this day, some of these youth still have my number. Some of these youth, I don't know their names, but they will message me from time to time. And I don't ask them who they are. I don't ask them what their name is. I don't ask them their age. I don't ask them their education. I don't ask them who they are. I simply ask them, how are you? What's going on? How's life? And to know that so many of our youth and our adults, so many of our families, so many of our community members are so broken, and yet they don't know where to turn because they don't have an anonymous number of someone they can text that they know that person will respond. Because they're ashamed of what they're experiencing, because they feel like they shouldn't have these thoughts, because they've heard that if they are depressed, then it means that their iman is weak, because they think they're broken, that there's something wrong with them. But there is nothing wrong. There is nothing wrong with needing help. There is nothing wrong with reaching out. There is nothing wrong with saying, I'm stuck, I can't do this. I don't know if I can keep going. This is what it means to be one body in our ummah. This is what it means to truly feel the pain of one another. This is what it means to be there, not just to speak in platitudes, not just to say, may Allah make it easy on you and to go on our merry way, but to actually take the time to connect with one another, to reach out to the one that maybe you haven't seen in this masjid. When was the last time that we saw Brother Munir, rahimahullah, in the masjid? When was the last time that you checked on him, that you asked about him? When was the last time that you saw Muhammad or Amina or Mu'mina or Amira? When was the last time that you've seen someone who maybe used to come to the masjid, who maybe you would see in the community, and they've stopped coming? Reach out to that person. Check on that person. See how they are doing. And no, you don't have to pry, and no, you don't have to become their therapist, but you do have to give that salam. You do have to check on them, because we don't know who is hurting. We don't know who is broken. But what we do know is that Allah will test each and every one of us. And we will be tested with fear. And we will be tested with hunger, and we will be tested with loss. And who will be beside us during these tests? Imagine the honor if it is you or it is me. Imagine the blessing if Allah Azza wa Jal allows us to be a means by which we connect someone to that help that they need. Imagine if Allah allows us to step outside of our shells of busyness, to step outside of that feeling of I've got too much going on, and allows us to be that help, that hope, that reason that someone does not despair. I was planning to focus my talk today on our family relationships and the impact on our mental health. And that is a big part of what we see happening in our lives, in our communities, and around us. But I have to preface that by saying, we can have the best of families, we can have the best of parents, we can have the best of community members, we can have the best of friends, and we can still be tested. And we can be tested in ways that maybe it's hard for others to imagine. And those tests don't make us broken, they don't make us wrong, they don't make us unfixable. They're simply tests that Allah Azza wa Jal knows we need, even if they're not the tests that we want. But what do we see happening in our families today? What do we see happening in our communities that is causing so much difficulty? Within the families that we work with across our Cornerstone offices, we've identified 5 major areas in which we see impact on mental health and mental wellness. 5 major areas in which we see breakdowns in relationships that can truly affect the way that we see the world and the way that we respond. Tomorrow, inshallah, in our workshop, we're going to go much more in depth into understanding trauma and responses and signs and symptoms, understanding mental health outcomes and what we can do. But today we want to talk about the potential causes, the possibilities of where these difficulties may arise from, or why the mind may lead us to such a dark place where we become hopeless. The first area of struggle that we see within our families and our Muslim communities is the area of domestic abuse or domestic violence. And so often when I mention this, I see people kind of shaking their heads like, not me, not in my family, not in my community, right? Because we often think of domestic abuse as being that black eye, that physical abuse, scars and wounds that we can see. But domestic abuse is so much more than that. Because there is emotional abuse, there is psychological abuse, there is sexual abuse, there is financial abuse. And these are abuses that do exist in our communities, they exist in our families, they exist in our homes. And they are the absolute opposite of the mawadda and rahmah that Allah Azza wa Jal guides us towards in terms of how our homes should be built in order to find that sukoon, that tranquility. But where there is no mawadda wa rahmah, there can be no sukoon. Sukoon, that breath that we take, that rest that we find, that tranquility that our minds and our bodies and our hearts need to be able to function in a way that allows us to face the storms of this dunya and make it through. So many of our homes are missing that sukoon. Think of your own home. Did you grow up in a home where maybe the constant tongue that you were spoken with was a tongue of criticism, a tongue that put you down, that told you you're not good enough, a tongue that told you you would never amount to anything. Think about your homes today. How do you speak to your children? Do you uplift them? Are you their source of sukoon, or are you their source of difficulty and strife? Do they turn towards you, or do they turn away from you? We often repeat the cycles of what we've learned in our own childhoods. And we often say, hurt people hurt others. If you are hurting, you cannot be the source of healing for anyone else. If you are hurting, you will wind up carrying that hurt towards others. This is what generational abuse looks like. And not just physical, but the emotional, the psychological, the sexual, the financial. All of these forms of abuse are often part of a cyclical chain that was never broken. And for each and every one of you that is here in this room today, stop and ask yourself, have you healed your hurt? Have you sought help for what you've experienced in your life? Are you where it stops? Are you the one that says it ends here? I will not carry the hurt that I've experienced in my past and hurt any others. Because that should be each and every one of us. Each and every one of us needs to stop and reflect and think about our own hurt. Emotional abuse in the form of criticism, put-downs, demeaning our spouse, our children. This is something I often see within our families. And we may think of it as encouraging, we may think of it as motivating, but it does quite the opposite. It decimates, it breaks people down. And it causes the inner voice to become so negative that the individual begins to believe, I am worthless. I am never going to amount to anything. I have no reason to keep going. Why? Because this is what they've heard. And this inner voice of emotional abuse may not necessarily be coming simply from the home. But think of the obsession that so many of our youth have with their phones, that virtual world that so often as adults we are cut out of, a virtual world that is filled with filters and images that our children will look at and consistently feel like, I am not enough. If I don't look like this one, if I am not this size, if I don't carry myself in this way, if I don't have these many likes and these many followers, then I am not enough. And so the inner voice continues to decimate, to put someone down. Now imagine if our children have homes in which they are uplifted. Imagine if we are that source of support, if we are able to tell our children that they are beautiful, that they are strong, that we love them, that we are here for them. Imagine the antidote to what they are consistently facing. But we can't say that if we don't feel that about ourselves. If we don't feel like we're good enough, if we don't feel like we're strong enough, if we don't feel like we are able enough, then we can't give that to anyone else in our life. Psychological abuse, we often hear terms like gaslighting and narcissist. We often hear terms like toxic family culture. And while these are very, very, very real situations, we also don't want to throw labels left and right and assume that everything is gaslighting and everything is narcissism and everything is toxic. But we do need to understand what this terminology means, where it's coming from, and how it impacts us. Because it comes from our mu'amla, it comes from our intention, it comes from us asking ourselves every day and every morning, taking ourselves to hisab and asking, was I the best version of myself today? Did I please Allah in my interactions with my spouse? Did I please Allah in my interactions with my children? Did I please Allah in my interactions with my neighbors, with my community? When we ask ourselves whether or not we are being the best that we can be, we will be able to impact the others and those around us. So addressing the domestic violence, the domestic abuse is critical. Sexual abuse. It's a topic we don't often talk about in our masajid. It's a topic that we don't often talk about in our homes, but it's a topic that we need to talk about. I cannot tell you the number of youth, young adults, teens, and even adults that self-harm, that attempt to take their own lives, that suffer in silence. Why? Because they've carried with them since childhood. They've carried with them the shame. They've carried with them the pain of molestation, of sexual abuse. Currently, statistics indicate that 1 in every 3 females will be molested, sexually abused, or raped. The statistics indicate that 1 in every 6 males will be sexually abused, molested, or raped. This is what we're seeing, and we have to wake up and not think that we're immune to it. We have to be able to talk about these topics. We have to understand the hikmah of Allah in guiding us towards how to interact with others. No, our children should not be left with their Quran teachers alone, no matter who these Quran teachers are. No, our children should not be left with their uncles and their cousins and with random neighbors and with the masjid auntie or the uncle. No. Allah Azza wa Jal has provided us ways in which to safeguard. And one of the best ways in which to safeguard our children is to talk about it. To be able to remove the shame, to remove that stigma, and to be able to say, tell me how you feel. Tell me what you're thinking. Tell me what's going on in your mind. Tell me what you've experienced. Because so often we can't. We can't speak to our spouses, we can't speak to our children, we can't speak to our parents, we can't speak to our community members, because we have this voice inside of us that tells us we're not good enough, that tells us we'll bring shame, that tells us this is a secret that we can't share. And this is from shaitan. Because when we don't bring things to light, then they continue in the darkness. And when things continue in the darkness, they grow and they grow until they lead us to despair. And Allah Azza wa Jal reminds us, لا تقنطوا من رحمة الله. Do not despair of the mercy of Allah. So this is the first area of concern that we see in families that can impact mental wellness, domestic abuse and violence. The second area of concern is the breach in trust. And so often this breach in trust, this sense of betrayal, it can come in so many different forms, but between spouses we see within our communities betrayals of emotional infidelity, betrayals of physical infidelity, betrayals of hiding and lying and breaking the sanctity of the relationship. Allah Azza wa Jal tells us in the Quran of the marital relationship, they are your garments and you are their garments. The closest thing to you, that which keeps you safe, that which covers you, that which allows you the sense of security as opposed to the vulnerability of a nakedness. That is the description of marriage in the Quran. And yet when husband and wife experience a breach in trust, when there is a betrayal, when there is an infidelity committed, when there are lies, this can lead to severe mental health outcomes, because that in which you've anchored your hope for sukoon is no longer there. And this can impact our children, this can impact our families, this can impact our communities. Because our children grow up and learn how to interact with their future spouses based on what they see in their homes. So many times we have clients who will come to our office and the marriage is ravaged and there is fights and there is terrible things that are occurring, and they say, we stay together for the children. And yet these are the same children who will sit in our offices years later and say, I wish my parents had gotten divorced. I wish I didn't have to grow up in a home where there was a lack of respect, where there was a raising of voices, where there was physical harm occurring. So we can't fix our families, we can't fix our children's states, we can't be there for them if we are not fixing what is within ourselves and within our marriages and within our homes, because that's where it begins. The lack of trust can also impact our children. So often we want to make sure that we are the parent who is checking the cell phone, who is making sure that the texts that are coming through, the Instagram, the Snapchat, we're looking over their shoulder consistently because we want to make sure that our children don't step out of line. But how many times are those the same children that create the Finsta instead of the Instagram, the fake Instagram, the children who have the burner phone because they're not allowed to have the cell phone, the children who wind up lying and eventually harming themselves because they're not able to talk to their parents. They're not able to sit down and have a conversation with their parents because their parents are parenting from a place of fear rather than a place of love. In order to rebuild trust, in order to be able to overcome that sense of betrayal that we sometimes see within our families, there has to be open communication. There has to be dialogue. There has to be a sense of connecting with one another, spouse to spouse, children to parents, children within a dynamic where they feel safe and secure, where they can find that sense of sukoon. We have to do better. Because it's not just our children that are hurting, we too as adults, as grown-ups are hurting and our communities are hurting. The child who is struggling with emotions may be an attraction towards the same gender and they feel like they can't talk to you as a parent because what are you going to say? How are you going to harm them? So they go online instead, or they talk about it on Discord or Vent or with their friends, and immediately they're given the pronouncement, well, you're gay. And they begin to live under this label, this idea that they're part of the LGBTQ community because it accepts them, because they were pushed away from the masjid, maybe because they have parents they can't talk to. Imagine the difficulty that breeds, the internal turmoil, the self-guessing, the doubts, the questioning. And this can lead to severe depression, it can lead to anxiety, it can lead to difficulties in terms of personality disorders. And the seedlings start with an inability to connect, not knowing where to turn, not knowing who to talk to. The third area that we tend to see difficulty and demise within families is in the area of stress. And stress often related to what we call the 5 Fs, stress related to family, whether it be in-laws or parents or raising children, stress related to the future. Worrying about what's to come, anxiety regarding the uncertainty of what's to come and how that can impact the relationship and the family. Stress related to faith. We know that our deen is meant to be an avenue of ease through these difficulties and these tests. But so often, we use our deen as a tool or a method to harden our heart rather than to soften it. To give pronouncements of haram, 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 rather than to channel that mercy, that compassion, rather than to channel that connection that the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam taught to us. And so often we see a breakdown in the faith of our children, in the faith of our families, and our own faith, because the harshness with which our faith is conveyed is a harshness that causes negative repercussions, not positive ones. So we said 3 F's so far: family, future, faith. Finances is another stressor that can severely impact the way that our minds work and the way that we address our worlds around us. Finances in terms of loss of finances, gaining finances. I've seen, families with too much finances, families with not enough in terms of finances, but fixating on something that is so fleeting rather than recognizing that the rizq comes from Allah, rather than accepting that we strive and we strive, but that Allah Azza wa Jal will allow what is written for us to reach us. And we know the narration that which is meant for us will reach us even if it is on the furthest mountain, and that which is not meant for us will not reach us even if it is between our lips. But finance is another stressor. And the last stressor that we see is friends. Friends of our children, friends of our families, friends of adults. Not having enough friends, not connecting with friends, having the wrong friends. But that factor of friendship is so critical. And we look to the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam and we see the Sahaba and the impact of the Sahaba upon one another, uplifting one another, that companionship. We've lost sight of companionship in our world today. And this is why so many of us feel alone. Because maybe we have acquaintances, maybe we have Facebook friends, maybe we have people that we see in passing, but what is a companion? A companion is someone who you can share your heart with, someone you can connect with, someone who you know is going to be there for you in that darkest hour. And when we lose sight of companionship, we feel alone. That companionship is so critical. Foster it. Seek it out, facilitate it for your children, facilitate it for yourself, make time for those connections and build them. Because we're not meant to be alone, and we're not alone, but we have to take those steps to ensure that those connections are there. The fourth area of difficulty that we see in our marriages is the difficulty of differences. Differences in the way that we communicate, differences in our culture, differences in our worldview, differences in our understanding and our perspective. And sometimes these differences can make us feel like we're the odd one out. Sometimes these differences make it so hard to be able to reach out to someone and feel like you're understood. And yet when we turn to the Quran in Surah Ar-Rum, we look at the series of verses. We often cite verse 21, the marriage verse, where we talk about that sukoon, where we talk about that mawadda wa rahma in the marital relationship. But the verse that precedes that verse, verse 20, is a verse that reminds us that Allah Azza wa Jal has created us, basharun tantashirun, as human beings who were dispersed on the earth, that we're different. That we come from different places, have different perspectives, have different generational cues, have different cultural cues. We're different. And Allah Azza wa Jal reminds us in those series of verses that one of the things that distinguishes us is a distinguishing in our colors and in our tongues. اختلاف ألوانكم وألسنتكم. The differences in our tongues is not necessarily a difference of languages, but it's a difference in the way that we communicate. So often we have families who will come to our office, a young adult maybe, a son, who says something like, I have never felt like my parents love me. They have never hugged me. They have never said, I love you. I don't think they care. And we will bring in the parents and we will tell them what's going on. Your son feels like he's not loved in the family. And so often we hear the mother maybe saying something like, what's he talking about? I cook dinner for him every night. I do his laundry. I drive him to soccer practice and to school and back. Isn't this love? And the father might say, you know, a lot of times we get Egyptian fathers, "Getak al-araf, dan ashtarit lak kaza wa kaza wa kaza." You know, oh my goodness, I bought you these sneakers and I bought you these Yeezys and I bought you the PlayStation. Is that enough? And what we see here is that difference in tongues, that we see a child who is reaching out and saying, what I need to feel loved, what I need to feel understood, what I need to feel heard is a hug. What I need is words of affirmation. And despite the parents feeling like they are giving that love, they are buying things for the child, they are gifting, they are giving acts of service, it's not what that person needs. And we see the same thing between husband and wife. So understanding the tongues of our family members, of our communities, of our friends, understanding that we communicate differently, and it's in these differences that Allah Azza wa Jal connects us, and that it's part of finding that pathway towards sukoon. And the final aspect, and I want to be mindful of the time so we have time for Q&A, but the final of the 5 factors that we see in terms of causing demise in the family is the issue of mental health. Our families are struggling, and we are seeing unprecedented numbers post-COVID of cases of clinical depression, of chronic depression, of clinical anxiety, of chronic anxiety. We are seeing record number of cases of bipolar disorder classified with mania. We are seeing incredible numbers of OCD situations, particularly within the Muslim community, a form of OCD known as scrupulosity, which is linked to religious ritual, which we will talk about much more in tomorrow's workshop, inshallah. But we are also seeing an alarming number of suicide attempts and suicide outcomes. And that is cause for concern, because something is wrong. And it's not the people who are struggling who are wrong. It is not those who are facing the hardest tests, which are the tests of the mind and the tests of the heart and the tests of the body and the tests of the soul. But it is what is wrong with us as a community that we are not able to talk about this. Every Jum'ah khutbah, we need to be able to address the ills that we see in our community. And the ills in our community are not just political. The ills in our community are not just educational. The ills in our community are not just many of the topics that tend to make it to the top 10 of Jum'ahs. The ills in our community are much deeper than that, and they're much more personal. And until we normalize this, until we have these sessions not just once every 6 months, but we hold them once a week, we hold them every day even if we have to, until we're able to talk about this topic openly, we're going to continue to lose the people we love. We're going to continue to say, if only, what could I have done? Let's pray that Allah Azza wa Jal protects us and protects our communities, that Allah Azza wa Jal allows us all to find ease in our hearts, that Allah Azza wa Jal cures the ills of the mind, of the heart, of the spirit, of the soul, that Allah Azza wa Jal allows us outlets for our pain and our difficulty, that Allah Azza wa Jal blesses everyone who is in pain, who is struggling, who has experienced loss, who has experienced difficulty. May Allah Azza wa Jal allow us all to be neighbors in Jannah, insha'Allah, as we go through these difficult tests in this dunya. Jazakumullahu khair.
Dr. Suzy, Jazakallah khair for sharing your invaluable insight and experience with us. I'm hopeful that this is the beginning of addressing the importance of mental wellness in the community and fostering healthy relationships, not just with our family and friends, but with the community as a whole. MashaAllah, we have a lot of questions that were submitted, and a lot relate to depression and loneliness, overthinking, anxiety. So what are some practical steps that individuals can take using key lessons from today's talk that they can start and implement in their lives starting today?
So I think, my hope, inshaAllah, is that our takeaway together is knowing that it's okay to reach out, that you are not going to solve this by yourself, nor should you have to. So often our overthinking or our depression will lead us to a place of thinking that nobody wants to be around me. I don't want to burden anyone with what I'm feeling. Why should I make other people feel bad or sad? No, reach out, speak up, find avenues of help. I know we have our cornerstone cards out there. I know the mental health committee here is working very hard to provide resources. The resources are there, I promise you. There are avenues of help. Please don't try to suffer alone. And yes, it may begin with the seeds of overthinking, but that overthinking can lead to paranoia. That paranoia can lead to OCD thought loops. Those OCD thought loops can lead to an impact on our functionality. Let's address the issues before they become mountains. There are still bumps that inshallah we can get through. So please seek help. There is the crisis text line 741-741. If you text the word salam to it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We have several organizations, Cornerstone, Nasiha, several other groups as well, where our interventionists, our therapists, our counselors volunteer and man that crisis text line and are there to respond. So 741-741, text the word salam, S-A-L-A-M. If you ever need to reach out and talk to someone, 988, it's the suicide hotline. People are trained to be able to address. If you have a thought, if you've given up, if you feel like there's no hope, لا تقنطوا من رحمة الله. The mercy of Allah is so wide, is so great, and it will get better. Insha'Allah, it will get better. You're not alone. Look for the resources, reach out. Take my cell number, text me. I answer texts all the time, okay? I never answer phone calls though, okay? So don't call me. But reach out. Use the resources that are there because we're not meant to do this by ourselves.
Thank you. This is a question from me before I get to the other questions. With the launch and the start of our mental health initiative here in the community, what are your suggestions for a community like ours of this magnitude, mashallah, and diversity? What can we do to support those that may be struggling with mental health challenges?
All right, great question. You know, a lot of times we think we have to, have a master's in counseling, we have to have a therapist degree, we have to have a PhD in order to be there, to do this work. And that's not the case. Support groups have been very effective. I do recommend that everyone who wants to be there, honestly, my recommendation is everyone, period, full stop, take a mental health first aid class. Mental health first aid, it's a 6-hour program. You can do it online. The American Muslim Health Professionals, it's a Muslim group that offers these programs consistently every 4 weeks or so. I would say as a community, maybe offer that. Offer the mental health first aid training because anyone can do it. It's like CPR. If you're a teacher in the school, if you're a cafeteria, lunchroom aide, if you're someone that's around children, it's recommended that you take a CPR class. I think in this day and age, everyone should take a mental health first aid training course. Take that course. It'll teach you the signs. It'll tell you how to ask, what to ask, and how to connect with others. Create support groups as a community. Make them weekly, make them consistent. Have a support group for single moms. Have a support group for those who are going through a divorce. Have a support group for youth, for children. Lots of support groups. And they don't have to be big, they don't have to be huge, just consistent. Even if only one person shows up, keep doing it because that can make a difference.
Inshallah. Thank you so much. We have a question here that says, how do you talk about struggling with mental health with a family who ends up saying, find Allah or pray to Allah or seek Allah and all will be okay?
So great question, because so often we tell those who are struggling with depression or with anxiety that their iman is weak, that they need to strengthen their iman, that if they pray 2 rak'ahs, they'll be fine. But subhanAllah, this is not what it means to have that sa'i, that striving. When Hajar radiallahu anha was in the desert with Ismail alayhi salam, she had tawakkul, she trusted in Allah, her iman was strong. But she didn't just sit there next to her crying infant and make dua and pray. She committed to that sa'i 7 times back and forth between Safa and Marwa. She did what she could do, which was taking those steps. Why every time we go to Umrah, every time we're blessed with Hajj, do we walk in those same footsteps 7 times back and forth? Because it is Allah Azza wa Jal reminding us of the importance of sa'i, of striving. So the person who says, pray 2 rak'ahs, strengthen your iman and you'll be fine, where is the sa'i? The striving comes in the form of seeking out the help that Allah Azza wa Jal has placed in our path. And that help, just as in the case of Hajar radiallahu anha, the well of Zamzam sprung up. And this was the hikmah of Allah. But she did her part of looking for that water. So look for the water. Seek the help of a therapist. Go to a counselor. Alhamdulillah, we have so many more resources today than we did 5-10 years ago. Seek that help. Because that's what it means to have true tawakkul. That's what it means to strengthen our iman. It means to recognize that Allah Azza wa Jal puts us through tests in this dunya, but He also gives us the answers of those tests. And we need to seek that out. And sometimes it's the form of a person, a service, a place. But we don't just sit down and just make dua. We make dua, we have tawakkul, and we commit to that sa'i.
Our next question says, how do we help our young boys process their emotions in a healthy way while also teaching them to become strong men?
Oh, great question. So we could have a whole conversation on toxic masculinity and, understanding what it means to have that sense of futuwa within the tarbiyah of our boys. I would say, first of all, we look to the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who upon burying his infant son Ibrahim, he cried. And as the tears ran down his face, the Sahaba that surrounded him asked him and said, why are you crying? Is this not the qadr of Allah? Is this i'tirad ala qadr Allah? Is this going against the qadr of Allah? And the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam answered and said, العين تدمع والقلب يحزن, that the eye sheds tears and the heart feels sadness, but the tongue does not utter that which is displeasing to its Lord. If the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam felt emotion, if he cried in sadness, if he expressed himself in moments of love and moments of joy, and also in moments of sadness and moments of fear, how can we raise our children telling them to suppress those emotions, to not talk about them? How often do our little boys fall and get hurt and cry? And we say something to them like, why are you crying like a girl? Man up. خليك راجل, right? This is again my Egyptian upbringing, okay? How many times do we hear this? When we see our daughters hurt and crying, how often do we say, you're such a drama queen, don't be so dramatic? Learning how to validate emotions, recognizing that someone can be very strong and still cry, that it is not a sign of weakness, that someone can have true faith and can have a love of Allah and a strength of tawakkul and still experience fear. Validating those emotions and recognizing that there's nothing wrong with crying, boy or girl, and then guiding our youth and especially our young men to walk in the footsteps of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who had the highest level of emotional intelligence of any human being to walk on this earth. And again, we could do a whole talk on the emotional intelligence of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Thank you. There are a lot of questions here about either hesitancy to seek help, whether they are depressed or feeling lonely, or people that are saying that how do you reach out to someone who is hesitant to receive help or has distanced themselves either from their friends or from the community or do not come to the masjid? How do you recommend addressing these situations?
Yeah, that's a good question. So oftentimes we have couples who maybe it's the wife, sometimes it's the husband, who will reach out to our office and say, we need counseling, but he's refusing to go. Or we need counseling, but she's refusing to go, right? And so often it starts with us being the example. Maybe it's your child, maybe it's your spouse, maybe it's your friend. Start with you. Make an appointment. Go to a counselor. I promise you there is no shame in it. It doesn't mean you're broken. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It means that we are returning to the sunnah of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in which there are connections between people, in which we are building trust in a relationship, in which we are seeking that which is missing in our world today, that sense of companionship and connection. Start with you. Make that appointment. Go to the masjid. As you are going to the masjid, as you are making that appointment, and you may think, but there's nothing wrong with me. I just want to help my son. I want to help my daughter. I want to help my friend. No. We all could use counseling. We all could use that guidance. We all could use that form of intervention. Go. And then maybe you reach out to that person and you say, hey, I had a session today. I went to counseling. It felt really good. to go to counseling, and I promise you it does. I promise you that being able to unpack your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions, being able to talk through difficulties that you may thought you've resolved, but you've really just buried deep inside, there is something so beautiful about being able to do that, and there is a release, and it's something that will make you better, inshallah. So start with you. Seek the help that you want for someone else. Be that change. Usually what I see happening when I tell couples to start with the person who is willing to go to counseling, the spouse will start to see change in the person that went to counseling. And there becomes almost like a positive envy that develops, like, why are you so calm? And then oftentimes the spouse will be like, oh, because my counselor gave me tools as to how to maintain my emotional control in these situations. Or, why are you smiling at me? You should be angry right now. Normally you'd be angry. And the spouse is not getting angry. And so very often we will see that spouse coming, the one who was resistant. Or we will often take other avenues. We might tell the spouse who's coming to counseling or the parent who's coming to counseling, we'll tell them to reach out to the person that they really want to bring to counseling and to say, hey, I've been going to counseling to help myself in communicating and connecting and learning how to deal with my emotions, but my counselor really wants to talk to the people I love, to the people who are closest to me. Would you mind coming for a session so that you can help me? Because we've been taught that asking for help or seeking help is a sign of weakness. And so often when we tell someone that we are the ones getting help, that we are the ones that need their help in order for us to be helped, they will come. And I cannot tell you how many times we've had a husband or a wife who will come in and say, well, I'm only here so that we can talk about what's wrong with my spouse, and we'll start the conversation that way, but by the end of the session, the person has begun to unpack what's inside of themselves. And I want to say 9 times out of 10, they will make the next session themselves. They will make that next appointment. So if you know someone that needs help, start with you. Seek out avenues for yourself and then be that change that you want to see in the other person, inshallah.
Thank you. We have a few more minutes, so I'll try to get some more questions in. What advice do you have for children being brought up in separate households with each set of different values? How do we keep kids engaged in Islamic activities?
Okay, another great question. So we also know that in addition to the rise in mental health struggles that we're seeing, we are also seeing an increase in the number of divorces and in the breakdowns in marriages. And the reality is that many of our children are growing up in either blended families or in families that are single-parent homes. And this is a reality that maybe we as adults didn't experience because maybe the numbers of divorce weren't quite as high, in our generation or in our parents' generation. But one of the key elements to creating that sukoon, that tranquility, whether in a married household or a single parent, is to ensure that you have healthy co-parenting skills. And this is what I always tell married couples who have children, that the two of them could get divorced, but they will always still be in one another's lives because they share these children. And learning how to co-parent is such a critical component. It's actually part of what we do in our premarital counseling. Prior to the couple getting married even, we talk about healthy co-parenting in a marriage, and if God forbid, the marriage was not to work, what does that look like? So I would say, as a single parent, again, seek that counseling. Look for ways that you can become a healthy co-parent. And even if your spouse is not willing or your ex is not willing, start with you. You will learn tools that will help you, even though you may think, but I'm the perfect parent, I'm the good one, she's the bad one or he's the bad one, right? No, seek out those avenues of help to ensure that you are doing the best you can do as a parent and finding avenues to convey that and communicate that, inshallah.
Thank you. I think we have time for maybe 1 to 2 more questions. Our next question talks about someone living in an abusive family situation, but they cannot get out or leave. How can someone support that individual?
Ya Allah, that's very difficult. If you are in a situation of abuse, it may feel like you're stuck. And again, that abuse, it may be physical, it may be emotional, it may be psychological, it may be financial, it may be sexual. Whatever form of abuse you are in, it is a form of oppression. And the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam reminds us that when we see oppression, we are meant to help the oppressed and the oppressor. And when the Sahaba asked, well, okay, we know how to help the oppressed, we try to pull them out of that situation, how do we help the oppressor? He said, by stopping the hand of the oppressor. So the one who is in a situation of abuse, please speak up, speak out. You have a community of people who care. You have a community of people who can help, and there is always a way. There is always a way. You may feel stuck right now, but there are ways and avenues for the spouse who is struggling maybe in physical abuse. There are avenues and groups that can help. We work very closely with Wafa House, with Manavi, with ICNA Relief. There are avenues that will provide you with what you need to get to a safe space. For the child who maybe is in a situation of abuse in their home, seek help. There are ways where help can be given, and it does not mean you'll be immediately removed from your family, because sometimes this is the fear that we're fed, right? But safety is such a critical component of our ability to grow, to heal, to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves. And that's incumbent upon us. If you are in a situation of abuse, it is oppression. And part of our deen mandates that we do something about that oppression. And if all you can do is just reach out anonymously even, call the hotline, speak to someone, you will be able to find that help, but take that first step. Do not remain in a situation of abuse. Allah Azza wa Jal will provide you with avenues and outlets, inshaAllah. That's where the tawakkul and the sa'i comes into play.
Okay. We will wrap the talk, inshallah, and tomorrow at the workshop, we will answer as many questions as we can. I want to thank Dr. Suzy Ismail for joining the community today and sharing her inspiring knowledge and experience with us. And inshallah, I look forward to many more events in which we can foster ongoing conversations amongst our families and friends for the benefit of the whole community, inshallah. I want to just remind everyone that tomorrow the workshop will start at 10:15 a.m. and the focus will be on mental health and emotional resilience. And like I said, we will do our best to address more questions tomorrow, inshallah. For those interested, Dr. Suzy's books are available for purchase tonight, inshallah, and there may be an opportunity for a book signing tomorrow, should time permit. Once again, thank you all for your time and for coming out tonight. May Allah bless all of you and your families, and I look forward to many more events, inshallah, with the community. Jazakallah khair.